The question behind this series is such a simple one, and it's the one that I always feel I want to ask people who've lived a life, really. It's like, it feels like we should get together all the people that have really explored this, and before we go, we should each share, so what do you think it was? Or what do you think it is? And you've obviously done that. I have your book here, which somebody connected. I can't even remember who connected us. Somebody did, said, oh, you should read this book. And I got hold of it, LSD and The Mind of the Universe. I'll just show that, which is what I've been reading. And you've made this incredible journey exploring the psyche through a lot of LSD. But unlike me, who kind of has done that a bit as well, you kept notes. Which is, I mean, I have notes, but they're kind of crazy scrawlings that you look at in the morning and go, what? But you've got notes. So where do you want, let's just jump in. You know, what is life? Where have you arrived at in the simplest sense? Where have you arrived at from all of that?
Goodness gracious. Boy, you are jumping into the deep end of the pool fast, aren't you? I don't know that I can answer that question, not in any absolute, end of the road kind of sense, but only perhaps have some observations on along the journey kind of sense. And I say that seriously because as deep as I was given the opportunity to explore the deep structure of reality and to experience layers and layers of spiritual reality from which it changed my understanding of physical reality and the relationship between the insemination and manifestation and the emergent quality of physical reality within the context of the mother universe, the spiritual universe. As deep as I was able to go in all these years of work, psychedelic work, I got to a point where I was shown the true infinity of the dimensions of spiritual reality, because I was after 50 high dose sessions, I was as far as I could possibly be. And then I was shown a reality far, far, far in the distance and was hit by a light from that reality that just shattered me. And I learned at that point that I had to let go completely of the idea of ever getting to the end of this journey. And therefore I had to let go of the idea of having a total grasp of what the entire project of existence and creation was about. So I respond to your question in that context. Like you, I appreciate deeply the evolutionary quality, the fact of evolution, the emergent dimension of evolution. I appreciate, one second, I'm realizing I have a heating system coming on that's going to make a noise problem. Let me stop for just 1 second.
Sure, Chris.
All right, noise will stop in a second.
No problem. So you were sharing about how
yes.
that expansiveness, and I completely get that. I mean, it's like, it's a crazy question. We're never going to answer it. But the journey you've made, even if it's like the process that we're in, have you arrived at a way of understanding for yourself the nature or something of the nature of this process that we call being alive?
Well, I see, first of all, reincarnation as a critical part of my worldview. So I see nature has found a way not only to evolve whole species and planetary systems, but it has found a way to evolve intelligent individual consciousness once it reaches a certain point of the journey. So as individuality emerges, reincarnation emerges through processes we don't begin to understand yet, but that part of evolution, part of this dynamic, creative, expanding, growing process involves an open-ended amount of time. We have an infinite amount of time within which to develop the experience of being human. And that means that we are constantly cycling back and forth between matter, spirit, matter and spirit, matter and spirit. And I think we're drawing more and more of the unbounded creativity of spiritual reality into the innate emergent forms of human existence, of human expression, so that we are learning and deepening and deepening, deepening. And I think we're just at the very early stages. I mean, we just became conscious about 5,000 years ago of the underlying connective tissue of consciousness. We just are beginning to sort of understand that that is our deeper identity. Life itself is our deeper identity. Nature, you know, the divine impulse is our deeper identity. So what's going to happen over the next 10,000 years, over the next 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000,000 years? So, you know, we're just beginning to sort of get past some of the early barbarian qualities of our lower evolutionary history, and to break into a clearer space where we can begin to create out of conscious intention, to create truly with a power of intention that will allow us to manifest inside time and space truly heaven on earth, to manifest heaven on earth with a perfectly pure and healed and cleaned body, and a healed and pure heart, and an augmented intelligence with the capacity to download awareness, to download insights from the creative intelligence of the universe with fewer filters.
I really resonate with the idea, especially the one you started off with, all of it actually, probably in a different way though, but yeah. I really resonate with the idea at the start about the idea of reincarnation, which is increasingly a very unpopular idea, I feel. It's there's quite a lot of resistance to maybe it's an English thing because we're so secular, but yeah. I resonate that with a lot. It looks to me like the process of evolution that started with, well, it's been going the whole of the universe, but the biological process, which has evolved species, has transmuted into the process of transmigration, which is evolving individuals.
Yes.
So I really get that, and that's an insight which I've not heard from anyone else, and so it's really nice to hear that shared sort of view of it. I'm sure many people have come to it, but I guess the underlying thing that comes up for me, and this is probably a big area again, but what I notice in the way you speak and in the book is that although you're talking about evolution, there's an element in which it's a downward thing, that it's coming in from above, from a spiritual dimension. And the possibility, which is really, I found very attractive to explore over the last period of my life, has moved me away from that, which is where I was for most of my life, because that's where spirituality is. But towards the idea of, well, you're left with then, where did all of that come from? Or what is that? What's its nature that's downloading or coming in or being filtered? And why wouldn't we actually see the whole thing as evolutionary, as emergent, that those greater things that we are part of, that we're coming into, are themselves flowering from this evolutionary process rather than us coming down from it? Yeah. And I wondered what your response was to that as a possibility.
Well, I've been listening to some of your talks in preparing for our discussion.
Well, I'm very moved. Thank you.
And I hear that very strong emphasis on the emergent quality, and that evolution emerges and soul, and it's all coming kind of from bottom up, from within. And I like that. I mean, I really am comfortable with that, with certain provisions. And here's what I have to deal with experientially that qualifies that.
Yeah.
And we can let go of the up-down kind of stuff, because what qualifies it for me is, as I have gone through states of consciousness where I've dropped aside my physical consciousness, entered into some level of immersion, dissolving into fields of surrounding consciousness, and then moving deeper into what I would consider archetypal reality, and then moving deeper into consciousness, levels of consciousness which pre-exist in a sense even before archetypal reality. I am constantly overwhelmed by the intelligence of what I am dissolved into. And the image which comes is an image that these greater fields, and so let's shift to an image circle, these greater fields are the context within which the Big Bang takes place and emergent reality surfaces. But there is a sense in which we are actualizing here latent potentials which pre-exist in these other dimensional realities. And I don't begin to understand the relationship between the details of how evolution works, but my experience is that we are incarnating, concretizing, instantiating dimensions of awareness or capacities that pre-exist before they are instantiated, so that we are actualizing in this dimension a potential which exists in another dimension. And that process...
When you say a potential, you're talking about, are you seeing potentials as things that exist? Like there's a potential for that, and there's another potential for that, and then because there's kind of two ways, isn't there? There could be, it's like I've got a piece of blue tack here. I don't know where I got it from, but it's on my tail. And it has the potential to be like that. It has the potential to be like that. It's full of potential to be lots of things. Can't be anything, but it can be lots of things. But it doesn't, there's not lots of potentials out there for the blue tack. Are you saying that there are actual potentials that we're moving into, or that there's a general potentiality for more?
I think it's more than a general potentiality, but I don't think it is as, I don't know whether it has set scripts. I think that what we're discovering on evolution is that there simply has not been enough time for the universe to evolve randomly into the forms that we have now experienced in 13.8 billion years. So there seems to be a latent, open-ended, but focused intentionality emerging in the evolutionary process. So the question is, are those forms open-ended? Are those forms intentional? Are they teleologically
Teleological,
aimed? Yeah. Or, so what is the depths and the intricacy? I don't know. But in that context, I experience the totality of my human existence as in some way an intentional manifestation through the dynamic flow of evolution, as an intentional manifestation of, and I hesitate to use, like you, the theological terms of the divine emergent, of the divine adventure. I call it the creative intelligence of the universe.
So let me just unpack that for a moment, because that was very beautiful, but I want to make sure I get what you're saying. So are you saying that you experience your life as God's intention, in a sense? Is that what you mean?
I experience my essence to be the essence of the divine.
Okay.
But the actualization of that essence and unfolding the full potential of that essence is a project that takes eons to refine and to master and to learn in the learning process.
So Christian, another quick question, just on with you. So when you say essence there, is Chris's essence different to Tim's essence and the potentialities different? Or is it a particular essence? Or are we all sharing a general essence here?
My take, if I were pressed to answer that, I'd say we're sharing the same essence.
Okay.
However, through the long history that's been shaping Chris and the long history that's been shaping Tim, there is a true grain in the jade, as the Buddhists say. There's a true individuality. There is a true host of capacities. But if you break them all down, if you go, well, what is that underneath, then you break into this universal reality, which we all share.
Yeah. That's my experience too. That resonates definitely for me. So I want to come back to what you said, because it's intriguing about intentionality. So is the intentionality which creates, I presume when you're talking about creating the life narrative. in some way, the story of Chris, or the story that Tim's been through, and what to make. Do you mean that's flowing from a divine intentionality, rather than it being a kind of like
Random.
The opposite view would be, I mean, it's a haphazard, thing which is happening, and who knows what's going to go on. Is that what you're sharing?
Yeah, I think it is, but that doesn't mean that what we mean by intentionality within earthbound parameters is necessarily the same as what I'm pointing to in terms of a cosmic intentionality. In the sense that if I have an intention to do something, I'm very narrowly focused and I orchestrate everything to bring that about. Maybe that's true of cosmic intentionality. Maybe it's more open-ended.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a dance, but there does seem to be an intention to create, an intention to manifest, an intention to unfold.
So one of the things which I've played with is the idea that that big mind, the mind of the universe, as you call it in your book. Well, the first thing is I'm aware of, as I look back on my life, that there's multiple ways of interpreting all the experiences I've had, and that the ones I chose at the time aren't necessarily the ones I would choose now.
That's the essence of reincarnation, isn't it? We learn.
Yeah. And that I see myself as a young person in a different way than I saw myself at the time.
Yeah.
And so I'm careful with the interpretations of my experiences, because I know that they can change.
Yeah.
And so that I mean, we're just jumping in and just going, the big mind of the universe. Yeah, that's just real. And if there's folks who think it isn't, and they're not listening to this and they think it's real, if they don't, then I completely understand. They might not. But between you and me, Chris, I'm, it's like, yeah, let's just accept that. That's there. And it's huge and vast and full of love and extraordinary.
Yes.
So then for me, the shift began to happen when I started to wonder about, what I started wondering about was whether it was possible to view this thing we're in with a very simple lens, which went, every moment is realizing a new possibility. That's everything I've ever experienced. And it's always been built on what happened before. I've never experienced anything else. So there's an emergent process whereby things build up, the past builds up and becomes richer and richer and richer. There's more and more information always, and it's always fresh and always new. And that whether we could look back and go, well, that's what this process is. It is something universal, that being, something which just is, something. So find the simplest quality, and maybe the simplest quality I can think of is that it exists. And that it exists is taking on every quality in an ever more complicated way. In which case you then would come to this universe, which may or may not be the first one. We can discuss that, but which is probably isn't, which is kind of, you can see an underlying theme, which is the building up of the intelligence of the universe. Because every time if every moment is building on the past, and the past therefore is implicitly present, because without it there wouldn't be this moment, then the information in the universe, the intelligence or wisdom of the universe, is constantly increasing, like yours and mine is.
Yes. And
that therefore it kind of, it was going, well, maybe this big mind isn't at the beginning, it's at the end.
Yeah.
It's a bit like, Tim didn't start with this, having conversations. It started with an egg and a sperm, getting it together and kind of doing all of this. And, or in terms of my body anyway. So that kind of, and whether therefore what we contact in these extraordinary states, which you've dived so deeply into, is like, it's the whole thing. But it's the whole thing having flowered into God, rather than us having it already being there in some inexplicable way.
I understand that sort of shift to a teleological reframing of the great mind, and I'm sympathetic to that, but I have some complications around that. But to do this, I have to sort of put a couple more cards on the table.
Yeah.
As you know in the book, time became very permeable in my work. And people often talk about time, space, and then eternity or no time. But my experience was in between time, space, and no time, there are multiple dimensions of time, multiple modalities of time. And so I moved into profound spans of time, but experienced them differently, almost in terms of simultaneity of all the moments. And so many times I was taken deep into our evolutionary future, but I experienced it not just as the future, I experienced it as a naturalized present. So it had the already has happened and a yet and in the process of emerging quality. And the already having happened, so I was kind of looking at the past from a future time. And so multiple of these experiences convinced me that they're just multiple modalities of time in the universe. So if we want to understand some of the deeper processes of the creative mind, then we have to step outside the perspective that we are currently in linear time. In linear time, I think there is a fruition which we are continually expressing and moving toward, which is truly there's a sense in which clearly we're building something, we're manifesting something, that something maybe exists in the future. But the irony for me is that something which exists in the future to some degree already exists in the seed conditions of the present. It already exists. So another experience that takes me there is midway through my sessions, this intelligence that was guiding all my sessions, and I never controlled any of them. I was always just surrender, and it took me where it wanted to go. It took me into the primal void. It took me into Satchitananda, just the void that is prior to all creative process. And in that context, there was a sharp juxtaposition between everything that we had achieved in evolution, everything that had been developed, but all the pain, all this terrible pain of the evolutionary process, juxtaposed to the absolute bliss, freedom, ecstasy of this something the primal void that exists before creation, which then leads to the question, why? Why would such a reality choose to manifest reality knowing that it was going to involve so much pain and suffering in the process? And the intelligence that I was with said to me, have we not learned anything? And it just shattered me. And because I just had the experience that there is a magnitude of learning which is taking place. But I think it's more than just learning. It's not, we often heard the idea that the divine is learning by creation and it's learning itself by exploring its own potentials. But I don't think it's just that. I think it's also that this big mind delights in sharing its being. So it's not just that it's learning something, but it is creating conditions where it allows more of its being to be experienced by more cells of its body. So
okay, so there's two really important things you've touched on there, both of which I was really looking forward to talking to you about. So I've got to choose one or the other now.
Yeah, go.
One is time.
Yeah.
Let's start with that because you did. And then the other, which I definitely want to come back to, is this idea of suffering.
Yeah. And
whether the divine mind could have done a much better job.
Yeah.
And, there's a part of me, I feel like an old Gnostic. I want to, it feels like whoever that is that set this up and thought that was a good idea. And if they did that consciously, fuck them. It's like there's a part of me that just feels like, no, not one.
We wouldn't do this to our children.
Exactly.
Possibly do that to us.
Yeah. And it kind of, I want to explore that and the role of suffering, and because it obviously exists.
Okay, so we'll come back to that.
But time, first of all, let's just play with a bit of time. So I have a real problem. I don't have any problem with experiencing the experience of timelessness, withdrawal, when you take attention into the emptiness, there is no time, but you come back and you can go, oh, I've been gone for 2 hours. But at the time, there is no time. And I completely get that. And I also get that certainly in psychedelic states, you can enter places where you're exploring, let me say, for my own thing, as ifs, like as if this, as if this, as if this, as if this. Now, I know a lot of people say, look, I come at, whether it's the block universe of Albert Einstein or the kind of spiritual, I've seen the future, it breaks my heart. That's the honest reaction. Intellectually, I don't like it, but it breaks my heart, because what it means is that everything that's happening has no meaning, because it already happened. So there's no creativity in the universe, actually. Whether you turn around and go, you're right, Tim, or I go, you're right, Chris, or we carry on the same as we were, or whatever we do, it's just already happened.
Yeah.
The whole juice, the whole meaning of our humanity just dissolves into determinism, whether it's spiritual determinism or it's reductionist determinism. And of all the ideas I find ugly, that is one of the ugliest. And I struggle with it then in a spiritual context. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I do. And I completely agree with you. And I want to pull a Tim Freke on you and encourage you to go both and thinking. You articulate beautiful, both individual, universe. How can that happen? Both and. I think something like that is involved in time too. I think there is creativity. I would never want to lose the creativity. I would never want to lose the zest and the juice of human experience. I'm not a determinist. None of my experiences go in the direction of leading me to conclude that this is all a preset game. Even my experience of the distant future does not lead me to believe that therefore creativity isn't genuine, true, genuine.
So did you see, just to make sure I've got you, so when you talk about the future, what makes you say, I saw the future, rather than I was given a vision of how it could be?
Yeah.
And and I bring that back to take us there. Because that feels like a completely different thing. That feels like a
different thing.
Like a visionary. It's not. That's a big version of a common experience.
Yeah. Well, and that's completely. I understand that experience, and I think that's a legitimate experience. But I would like to offer something with a little more ontological weight behind it.
Okay.
And I can't give a justification for it other than an experiential justification. The experience is that in some essential way, and I don't know whether that means in all the details or individually formulated, but in some essential way, there is a knowing inside the Mother Universe, which I don't want to say knows the future, but is the future in some deep way, some kind of is the future. And when I enter deeply and dissolve into the body of the divine, it has taken me into that being of the future, not simply the potential, though that's another truth, but into the being of the future, so that when I'm in there, I experience it as a true future.
But if that is the case, how do you avoid how do you avoid going, well, in that case, how do you avoid determinism if you really take that as the ontologically true?
Just like the individual in the universe, how do you avoid one collapsing into the other?
I don't see with the paralogical thinking, I'm not encouraging contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for a higher synthesis.
Yes.
So I'm an individual because I'm part of the universe. I come from the universe. I'm then conscious of the universe.
Yes.
But with the time thing, I can't do that, because if it's like either this moment, either the relationship with this moment is that the past has happened and is fixed, and the moment is creative because it's moving forward, and I don't know what you're going to say next. And that's what's so beautiful about it.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, but if I was in the right space, I could see that I would know, because for God it's already happened. And so that's why I'm more attracted to the idea that the universe, that this may not be the first universe. The universe may be doing what universes do, like Tim's body did what bodies do. And although Tim had never happened before, many bodies had happened before, and the body had a basic idea where it was going, and therefore it was teleological. And that the universe may have a basic idea where it's going, but how this one will turn out and where it will, how it will flower into the divine is, who knows? Because it's necessarily creative. That works for me because it's open-ended.
Yeah.
But it's that boxed-in block universe. It's already, and even if it's in the mind of God, then it feels suddenly like, well, the whole thing's pointless, then, isn't it?
Yeah, I understand. I do understand, and I feel that tension, but I don't feel it within me personally.
Interesting. Why not?
I think it's because some of the concepts that you're drawing on to frame the dilemma are concepts which my experience have dissolved. So when we talk about God knowing the future, that they're all
being the future. Let's use your phrase. If God is the future, it's just the same. It's the same.
Mm-hmm.
I have the same response to it, and I'm aware that other people don't. I mean, I'm aware that there's lots of physicists I talk to who think the blocks universe sounds great, even though the fact that they even believe in it is predetermined. And I don't get that. I don't get why we're so ready to sacrifice the creativity inherent in our experience of emergence, which we call time.
What I can share is that my experiences in deep time feel to me, and they actualize within me as completely compatible with my experience of the core creativity that lies in our center. We are genuinely creative. We are genuinely experimenting. And if we are genuinely experimenting, then the outcome is uncertain. The outcome is open-ended in all.
So wouldn't that mean, Chris, and I'm just being devil's advocate here, just pushing it really. Wouldn't that mean that therefore what I kind of want to say back without any justification is, well, doesn't that mean that you've misinterpreted your experiences then? Because if that's true, then the other experience, which is clearly profound, you must have misinterpreted it in some way when you've gone the being of the universe. God is already the future.
Yeah. And what I'm asking is consider the possibility that there are frames of reference that as the frames of reference change, the logical implications change. And there's something about the frame of reference of dissolving into large scope. It's kind of like we're in the planet, we know everything about the planet, we're exploring the planet, and then suddenly for one afternoon, we are the galaxy.
Yeah.
And the expansion is so dramatic, there is a certain sense in which from the perspective of the galaxy, there is a certain inevitability of the spinning of the planet, of the unfolding.
Okay. So that's qualified again. It's not that it is fixed. And the inevitability or the tendency is something we experience in everyday life, isn't it? There's a.
Well, yes, except I don't want to dissolve it and simply say it's. I want to hold on to some type of ontological depth to there being dimensions of reality. I don't go out to God.
Okay.
But there are dimensions of reality which are aware at breadths of time, just as it is aware of breadths of space. And so that the universe is self-aware in dimensions of space in a non-local way. And there's a way in which it is self-aware in dimensions of time. But just as non-locality does not dissolve local influence, local causality, there's something about the breadth of, let's call it non-local time, which doesn't dissolve the experience of creativity within local time. And I don't know how to reconcile these two. I hold them as kind of simultaneous experiences, which I try to hold in terms of trying to bring them together into my awareness and into my being, but I cannot dissolve one in favor of the other.
Do you think there's any possibility, and this would be interesting as a more general thing about your LSD experiences generally, but do you think that even these deep experiences can be shaped by our, in other words, we have now in our culture ever since Minkowski space-time, we have this idea of treating time as if it's spatial, which it clearly isn't, but nevertheless, it's clearly related to space, and relativity physics has been a massive success. But what it gives us is a spatial metaphor that then gets taken literally, and we end up with this whole block universe idea. And I wonder to what degree that feeds into how we experience these other things too. Because if these things, you always, God knows, life is so mysterious. So the idea that you've got two things you can't reconcile is like, of course, it's like, I understand. But the tension between them feels really, really strong. And it undermines something so essential to our humanity. And I just wonder, do you think, just as a general thing, do you think when you have that experience of going, it's like, like non-locality in space, it's like non-locality in time, to what degree those things feed in from the cultural influences that have led us to think in those ways, and even then occur in psychedelic states?
Yeah. I think you're trying to find slippage in the system that allows you to hold on to creativity and the authenticity of genuine creativity inside time and space. But I'm not going to let you off the hook quite that.
I'm definitely doing that. It seems absolutely, I would say that my own, look, I'm going out of focus. How's that? I don't know why my camera is doing that, but it's kind of interesting that it is. I would say that the last period, my first period was all about enlightenment and waking up and God knows what, exploring everything. And then the rest of it has been much more focused on humanity and this feeling that my experiences lead me to is that this matters. Yes. This is not an illusion. It's not a mistake. We haven't fallen from somewhere. Yeah. This is integral to the whole massive project. Includes Chris and Tim in a way that Chris and Tim are actually significant, and that applies to everyone. And that it seems absolutely essential for there to be meaning in that way. Yeah. That what I'm about to say next has not already happened.
Yes. Now, I affirm everything you've just said about Chris and Tim and the creativity of and the importance of the physical universe. And we aren't simply getting out of the physical universe. We are growing deeper and deeper into the fruition of the physical universe. And all I can say at this point is that I don't find anything in my experience of deep time which contradicts that, even though it seems like it should. I know that it seems like it should. It should lead to determinism, but it doesn't in my experience. It leads to an appreciation of different orders of scale of creativity. And it's like there is a creativity at one level of scale, and there is a creativity that's taking place at another level of scale, and a creativity that's taking place at another level of scale. And so there is a time breadth to some of those deeper levels of scale, but they're all saturated with this movement of creativity that doesn't contradict the fact that I don't know what I'm going to say in 30 seconds, that this is live. This is there.
It's live. That's the great phrase for it. So I don't have any problems with the different levels of creativity. It's when the creativity stops and it's fixed. So let's accept that either through choice or through destiny, our experiences have been different around time. Yeah. And unless you've got anything else you did want to throw something at me, actually.
I want to go back to your question of, are my experiences being conditioned by my cultural conditioning? Now, I'm a professor of religious studies. So I have a lot of knowledge of world religions like you, and I taught comparative mysticism, and of course, I've been educating myself as a layman to science. And so I have all these ideas running around. So the question is, do all these concepts that I bring to my experience, do they orchestrate my experience in some fundamental way? So I have to peel away these subtle cultural levels out of my experience. And I understand that, and that functions to some degree, but I'd put it a bit differently. I understand all psychedelic experience, like all spiritual experience, is basically participatory. I experience this big mind, the creative mind, as a field of infinite potential. And my mind, when I amplify my consciousness with the psychedelic, it is as if I drop my mind into the infinite potential. It acts as a seed that crystallizes a certain set of experiences out of the infinite potential. So in that sense, there is a way in which what I am, when I enter, precipitates a certain set of experiences out of the infinite potential. But the next step is, if I go back, these experiences that are precipitated change me as I absorb them, as they purify me, as they allow me to let go of beliefs and beliefs and beliefs. Then the seed crystal that I drop into the infinite potential in future sessions is different. And it crystallizes a deeper set of experiences out of the infinite potential. So then the question becomes, can you clarify the seed crystal and dissolve the cultural beliefs, in a sense, of presuppositions of the seed crystal so deeply that you truly enter into a communion, or however we want to describe this embrace, or this dissolving into the reality of this infinite mind, in a way which truly transcends and escapes the limitations of your own historical conditioning. My experience is that, yes, that is possible. And partly this comes from the fact that so many of the experiences which I report in the sessions were totally unexpected, completely overwhelmed by the novelty of it, things that I had never dreamed possible. I had never dreamed deep time possible. I had never dreamed any number of the experiences could be, would be, as they are. And I never dreamed what even touching these conditions temporarily for a few hours on a good day, how they would impact me, how they would affect me, what that meant. So on the one hand, I want to say, yes, our cultural conditioning does influence. On the other hand, I think that cultural conditioning can be dissolved, can be weakened. And so that I personally trust the adventure of engagement, and I will struggle to understand it, to comprehend it. Now, when I'm trying to comprehend it, I will bring all my knowledge forward to comprehend it as best I can. But I think what I am trying to comprehend is not something which is inherently contaminated with my assumptions, because I've just died too many times at too many levels. And when you die, you just leave it all behind, but if you die multiple times, you leave deeper and deeper levels behind.
Yeah. And I think that goes on in the ordinary life process, let alone the psychedelic one. That kind of constantly reevaluating and leaving behind. Yeah. So, okay, thank you. I get that. And I certainly have touched that as well, that sense in which it's a kind of both and answer I think you're giving. And I get, that I love the idea that it's participatory. There was a little section that I was reading just this morning where you were talking about that. Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly right with everything, actually. Yeah. So I kind of want to jump to suffering now. Are you all right with that? Because I don't want to lose that thread, because you brought up a whole picture of things. That's really important. So there's a big theme in the book is suffering. So there's two things really. I don't know which to go for. One is, one of the things I experience the mind of the universe. The greatest quality that I associate it with is love. That's the way it's always been since I was small, and in a way that huge. And then, so one of the things which attracts me about this idea that I was exploring with you a bit earlier about having the big mind as something which the universe is flowering into or emerging into, rather than the thing which set it all off and did it.
Yeah.
Apart from the ontological thing of you've just taken God and put him at the beginning, and where's that? How's that solved anything? But but the other problem with it is that the attraction, I think, which comes up for me about the evolutionary picture, is it's so redemptive, because it means that the suffering that has been entailed, and not just the suffering, the kind of craziness, all the dinosaurs, or all the extinctions, and the kind of craziness of the evolution and how it's been, is not the work of some mad god, some big mind that doesn't know what the fuck it's doing, or is willing to just have a lot of collateral because that doesn't matter much.
Yeah.
But rather is something which is actually arising from it, a bit like Tim is arising from this, and is wanting to reach out and to redeem it and to reach into it, and therefore that impulse in me which goes, no, is it's in me going, no, because it's the most emergent thing. Yeah. And the most emergent thing is this all embracing the universe conscious of itself and holding everything within what's felt as love.
Yeah.
So I struggle with this idea of the universe as the big mind going, oh, well, suffering, but hey, look what we gained.
I too. Let's banish that bastard.
Okay.
That's not what's happening. It's not a universe by design in that heavy-handed way. Okay. Because whoever designed this painful universe doesn't deserve our affection. But is there a way in which, well, the issue of suffering is so intense, it's so important, and the theologies which have been shipwrecked on the problem of suffering, they deserve to be shipwrecked, because suffering is a deep, and I'm always remember Ramakrishna saying, if you want to know God, you must be willing to look suffering in the face.
Yeah, that's it.
So you have to take on the whole of the suffering. And if there is love in creation, you have to look very, very deep into creation to understand how love can manifest such extraordinary pain. So what the hell is going on? So the deeper question becomes, you can't answer the question of suffering without an understanding of what's taking place, what the larger process is. Now that brings us to a question of how much of creation do you think we have actualized up to this point in time? Because if we're trying to judge a play and suffering is the theme of the play, it makes a big difference if we're in the first act of a 10-act play or if we're in the 9th act of a 10-act play. Because if we're looking at the quantity of suffering in creation and we are assuming that, well, if we judge the creation process harshly, not the creator, but the creative process harshly, if we judge it harshly, that means we have a frame of reference within which we can judge it. And that means we have a frame of reference of thinking we know what it is about. But what if existence is about much more than we think it's about? What if it's about a developmental process which stretches infinitely beyond our present moment of actualization? And if suffering becomes recontextualized as a variable, the more we begin to move into, the more we begin to actualize the deeper capacities that are innate within our being. In one of the sessions that I know you've read, I was taken back to the very beginning of, it felt like the beginning of the Big Bang, and I experienced creation kind of as a core process. And in that, I was just overwhelmed by love, just love, just divine love pouring into me, exploding me more than I could ever hold and imagine. And in that context, I experienced that creation, that love was at the drive of creation, that love was the core impetus. It wasn't just an expression of intelligence. It wasn't just an expression of trying to know more and to actualize more, but there was a fundamental love in that process. And I experienced that I, in some way, Chris Bache or the lineage that Chris Bache is part of, I in some way participated in the choice of creation. And I voluntarily took on a role in that process, and a role which at that time, whatever time means at that context.
Hang on, Chris. You're at the Big Bang taking on a role. Can you take me through that again? How, in what way are you in the, I mean, obviously you're in the visionary psychedelic state, experiencing this in the psyche, but actually that you're the when you say the lineage of Chris, well, I can get that. Obviously you are the universe, you are the Big Bang. There's the Big Bang meeting itself, having a conversation about itself right now. But but in what way you made a choice? What form did you have that you could make a choice or be conscious or exist? What's
good question?
What does that mean?
And I don't know the full answer to that question. All I know was that I had dissolved into a condition which took me back into a primordial state that appeared to be prior to Big Bang, experienced not only the intelligence that was manifesting its creation, but the love manifesting its creation. And then I experienced with great surprise that somehow I, whatever that means, consciously participated in the decision to create at that primordial level. And that required taking on a responsibility for, maybe ask the divine for the suffering that would be manifest in creation, but that was an acceptable trade-off for what would eventually be realized within creation. And the most important thing I think to understand about when we come to think about suffering is creation is not done. We are not done. The creative process is not done.
I get that. That's the redemptive quality, isn't it? You know, suffering is suffering that leads to something better. The reincarnation thing is part of that as well. I think it's redemptive because it goes. The story's not over, and when the story's not over, there's another chapter which makes the last chapter redeemable. So I'm completely with you with that.
Yeah.
I struggle, I think, because if I think back to, I mean, your experiences are very psychedelic experiences, or if I think back to my psychedelic experiences, then I think if I was myself having that, or was with one of my co-travelers who reported that, I think I'd be inclined not to take it literally. I'd also be inclined to think, well, you know, that you were talking about before about cultural influences. Well, the mere thing of the Big Bang is obviously a very recent cultural influence, and in some way, what the psyche's doing is playing with. When you go to the deep places in the psyche, it plays with these ontological visions. But it isn't necessarily, well, actually, okay. So this brings this actually, I'm kind of shifting. You'll have to forgive me, but you say such interesting things. Because this is another question, but maybe we've got to ask it now because that does make it. We can't deal with the other one otherwise, which is the whole issue of revelation, which is, I think, is a fascinating one. You know, is knowledge by revelation. That you could have had that experience and then come back and go, this is it. I actually, this is what happened. There was my essence in there, and maybe yours, and we made a decision as a revelatory state. And as someone who works a lot from intuition in everything I do, I understand the power of revelation, but I'm also very careful with it because I think it needs an awful lot of questioning. And I wonder how, given that an awful lot of what you're saying comes from individual revelation, how you work with that.
Yeah. Two things come to mind. One of them is that I don't think what I experienced is in any way unique to psychedelics, but echoes the cosmology that emerges in spiritually distilled psychedelic experience is deeply congruent with the cosmology that emerges in our deepest and best mystical traditions. So we simply have another vehicle for.
But you would expect that, though, wouldn't you, Chris? if it was a psychological phenomena that, I mean, I'm not putting it down as that. I think it's a hugely important one, but it wouldn't be a surprise. I mean, most of the experiences I've ever had, well, initially they just happened. And then I didn't know what they were. And it was amazing. And then I learned spirituality and I read huge amounts of books. And then everything I experienced was seen through that lens. And then I freed myself from that. And now I don't see it through that lens. So wouldn't it be almost like you would expect? I mean, I'm not surprised that so many of my psychedelic experiences would feed into the books I'd read and the ideas that were congruent. No?
I understand that, but I'd suggest, look, what I was intending is something kind of different.
Okay.
So let me start with the distillation of psychedelic experience. People use psychedelics in many, many different ways, in different projects and different purposes, and that's all fine. In the particular way that I've used them, which is echoed in many other people's experience, I create a container to absolutely hold that experience and to distill that experience and let it burn me down and tear me apart and just crush me as much as it wants to crush me and dissolve me wherever it wants to dissolve me into. And I hold it and I distill it in its as intense and pure form as I can. And then when I come out of it, I capture it as completely as I can within 24 hours. And I think about it and contemplate it and hold it. And I think that the capturing it and the contemplating it is part of the process of entering into clarity in the next experience.
But what strikes me about what you've said then is how foreign it would be to me, for instance. So if I think about, I mean, every psychedelic experience I've ever had, I've never had I wasn't smart enough to go, let's write this all down and do it. You know, I was too young for that, I guess. But every single one has been a sacrament. There's no doubt about that. And the experiences have been hugely important to me. But the language which you used then, and the language which you use in the book, is very foreign to me. This being crushed and broken down, and it's already quite violent language. Whereas my experience of awakening, one of the things that, you know, it's a theme, isn't it? It's the death of the ego, or the death of this, and it's like, wow, my experience of life has not been like that at all. I haven't felt like I've been died and broken, and I have been, of course, along the way. I've been had me bang and all sorts of things, but I wouldn't say my great breakthroughs and the journey has come from being crushed and broken, and I need to arrange a place where I can be really broken. It's felt much more tender and like growing something. And so I wonder whether even the way that you set it up in your mind in terms of how you viewed those sessions had in it already a kind of a quite a violent metaphor.
So, because, first, I've always been very envious of people like yourself who kind of tumbled into their first mystical experience when they were 11 years old or 12 years old. I was like, oh boy, that's great. I just assume Tim's soul lineage has its own history that brings Tim into this life with a certain porosity of being. Chris's soul lineage brings Chris into this life with a certain maybe density of being, which requires a little bit more hammering. It's not that I sought or choreographed suffering in my sessions.
Right.
Because the suffering that emerged in my sessions went beyond anything that I had experienced. And anyone who knows Stan Groff's work knows that he understands the perinatal dimension, and he understands and he really expects there to be a certain kind of angst in the process. I get that. But I was completely unprepared for the dimensions of painful experience that took place at deeper and deeper, deeper levels of consciousness. Now, some of this, I think, is partly because of the speed with which I tore the levels away. If you're sloughing the skins off gently, slowly, then they come off in smaller increments. There is more of a sense of flowering. But if you kind of tear them away faster, if you're impatient and you're rushing into the depths of the divine, there is a sense in which the levels of your being are being peeled away. What I learned in my experiences was that there is a cycle, that in this hyper-intensified state, there was a purification process. And I learned that death is ultimately just purification, and the suffering is just about purification. There's a purification process. And I learned that the deepest revelatory breakthroughs took place after the deepest purification.
What's been purified, Chris?
Well, there's the question. At the end, at the appendix of my book, the last appendix in the book, I asked the question, what is it that's dying in these states? You have ego death, but that's in the beginning. What is it that's dying at deeper and deeper levels? It's because it becomes a real question, because the surrender and the collapse of everything I had known myself to be in my previous sessions, which was way beyond Chris Bache, that had to dissolve and surrender in order to move into even deeper intimacy. And the four answers that I lay out there is this: ego death, there's species ego death, which takes place at the collective level, which I think is what the ocean of suffering was about, some kind of healing that took place by allowing the pain of human history, which is lodged in the collective psyche, all the terrible things we've done to each other, by allowing that to enter into my conscious awareness that came through, At a deeper level, there's a death of what I call the shamanic persona, the death of the shamanic self, because if the universe has multiple layers, even all of your own psychedelic knowledge, which you have gathered in this distilled container, even that is not big enough to operationalize at a deeper level of consciousness.
So the metaphor which you're using there, and I'm not suggesting, I'm not using the word metaphor to imply it's unreal in any way, but the image that you've created for us is obviously it's got a big it's got a strong lineage, and the idea of purification is but it comes very much with that idea of we've fallen into this shithole and we need to get out. That's where the purification image tends to come in the mystical literature.
Yes.
In all of the Axel religions, really, isn't it? It's like fundamentally get out of here, get away, transcend, get away from something.
Which I reject.
Yes, I do understand that. And that's why I'm intrigued, really, to see how these fits together. Because and I completely get, I remember taking peyote and rolling around on the floor of a teepee for 16 hours, feeling like there was literally heavy duty machinery in my heart, just going, stay there, Tim, and we're just gonna, and then coming out afterwards going, wow. and it was very painful. But I willingly underwent it, and it was a rebirth. It was for sure. Yeah. But overall, so I get the experience a bit. I haven't done it like you've done it, but overall, it kind of feels like, for me, it feels much more like we're growing. Like the ego, it feels like even the ego death doesn't really ring for me anymore. It feels like Tim's still Tim, and what's the ego? It's like I'm just there, but I'm now aware of something greater than Tim, or a part of Tim which is greater than Tim, or part of my soul, and then which has lived before, and now I'm aware of God that I'm a small part of, and or whatever that so that rather than being anything to rip away or to, there's kind of assumptions and things which stop me being able to see, which pass away. But I don't have that same sense that seems to have been very important in your journey of like and I do get that. It's not like I don't get what you're saying. I really do get what you're saying. Yeah. It just doesn't feel a fundamental description of what the process is.
Yeah.
It feels like an optional, slightly unbalanced, even perhaps, approach to what the process is.
Well, again, it may just be that took into that a denser character. And
we're certainly all different, and I certainly get that, and I love it. I mean, I love that you've done this journey. I think it's so mad that you could have possibly done that much LSD and kept all the rest. I mean, I love that. I mean, what a life. Well done. I mean, just what a great thing to have done.
The way I think about it is initiation, learning takes place at these levels by becoming the levels. You have to cease to exist. Literally, we're just too small to experience the scale.
Okay, I can now say, great, you've given me the chance to say what it is I'm trying to say and see what you think. For me, it feels like the other levels don't cease to exist. It's just my attention has now gone to somewhere else.
Yeah.
So when I experienced, big experience last year, there was no Tim, there was no time, there was just, I can't even describe it, just a light that wasn't even a light, but just like, just a beautiful beyond words, and utterly transformative. But I don't think anymore that it was Tim ceased to exist. It feels like, no, my attention was now not on Tim like it is now. It was on this more transcendental state. And so there was no time, there was no form, there was no thought, there was just, and then my attention came back to Tim, and there he was. Nothing had died, nothing had been ripped away. It's just that I'd learned through Tim to be able to be conscious of something which transcended Tim. And that's...
So let me ask the question then. How far do you think one can push that process of shifting awareness, letting awareness detach from the narrow side, shift into a larger perspective? Then the question is, how far could it go? How many layers are there to shift awareness into, to open up into? My experience is that in order to become operational, fully operational, now, and I emphasize that because we can have brief contact with these dimensions without being fully operational at them, but to have stabilized consciousness so that you can come back repeatedly and really become aware at these levels. My experience has been that in order to move into a deeper operational level, there has to be a letting go. And
I've got you now. I've got you. Yes.
It's easier.
Yes. Okay, so I would probably say the same thing, actually. I'm glad we did that because I kind of feel like I've got what you're saying. So the way that I might say something, I think it's similar, tell me if it's similar, is it feels like, look, firstly, I don't think there's any limit that I've found. I mean, just like, it just keeps on going, and hallelujah for that. And it's so nice that I'm still surprised at this old age. But I definitely get that Tim, which I see more like the foundation than the problem, needs to transform in order to be able to allow the stability to return to those states more, and that there's an evolution happening in the individual soul, which is developing the propensity. I kind of see that like spiritual maturity is that development, but I don't feel it rips it to shreds or anything. In fact, it feels more like it just moves, it just becomes more able to sustain deeper states more readily. And
so then the question again I ask is, how many deeper states are there to enter into? So one could enter into preliminary or secondary deeper states, and one begins to experience the tapestry of life and so on and so forth. But then are there deeper states still? And then what would be the nature of the transition or the cost, or simply just learning? It's just a matter of learning how to cooperate with a reality that is taking you into those states, but in order to take you into those states has to kind of monkey with your system in order to allow you to enter into those states with your consciousness intact. Because many people enter into these states, but they come back, they can't describe where they've been. But to be able to hold that awareness there and bring it back here, certain adjustments have to be made. So for example, when I entered into archetypal reality, when I began a series of sessions at that level, I went through a process which wasn't really difficult, but it was quite distinctive, in which I had to die as a human being, or I had to let go of everything I had known as a human being. I had learned that there is a sense of identity which we have as a human, which is deeper than our identity as an individual human being. So Chris Bache dies at a certain level, or he softens and goes into...
But Chris is still here, right?
Chris is here. But in the state, the state of consciousness that I'm entering into is not spacious consciousness.
I get that. Yeah. But you've come back to Chris, and I'm still having the pleasure of meeting Chris.
Yes, I come back to Chris, but that leads us eventually into a deeper question of, well, then what is Chris? You know, once you, but let's hold that question.
Okay.
I had to cease to exist not only as Chris, I had to cease to exist as a human being. And within any frame of reference, I had to be willing to allow my consciousness to exist completely above the field of the collective unconscious, to enter into some dimensional reality which is beyond human experience.
See, I get that.
Yeah,
I completely get that. Because, and to just use this, the save going into other experiences, just take the one that I shared just then.
Yeah,
where there was nothing.
Yeah.
So I had to be willing to let go of everything, and had a fantastic time because I've been used to doing that.
Yeah.
But here I am and I am Tim. So it's that sense in which I get that there's a temporary sense where you need to be able to, with the attention particularly, you have to be able to be willing to let yourself experience a different level of reality with your conscious attention. And that can be, a lot of people hang on, I think, when that happens, and they can't, and they're frightened, and if you're lucky enough or you've done it enough, then you can. But my attention came back, and so yes, the ego did die, but it's still here, or the body disappeared, and yet it's back, and there were no thoughts, but now there are. And so in a way it feels like they weren't in the way. There was just I needed to be able to shift my point of reference. And I completely get that you would need to let Chris go and go beyond your humanity. And I completely get that.
And if I don't do the high dose LSD work anymore. I mean, that really ended in '99. But when I do psychedelics today, I've cleared out so much at so many layers that when I open, it's an easy dilation into these levels. Though I don't go, I don't go to the depths that I've gone into the deep work, because that takes a lot of training, a lot of athletic,
Interesting. That's really interesting.
You can get to the Olympics, but 20 years after you've won the gold in the Olympics, you can't run that fast anymore.
Okay, so we should. I mean, I just so enjoy, but we should look at how we can bring this to a close. Okay. So let me come in with a very simple question. Okay. So how old were you when you first did this? Then you started this process. 30. Okay. So that was so was that the first you done it? Was that the first LSD? I can't remember.
Yeah, 79 to 90.
Was your first LSD was 30? Okay, yeah, so that was quite a bit.
I was totally naive about psychedelics, and through college and graduate school. Yeah.
So what made you? I mean, I'm thinking when I took LSD for the first time, probably when I was 18, I think, and it was amazing. I mean, just and led to, it wasn't my awakening, which was great. So there's two questions. That's the two questions I had for you. Was LSD your first awakening? And what the hell, man? Why did you go, let's write all this down and start this massive journey? I mean, no one else, all my friends have done this, but none of them have done what you've done. What that was incredible. Why?
Those awakenings were my first awakenings. I had been meditating for years, but those meditations, I was still working at the introductory levels and encountering the blocks one encounters. But in terms of the true awakenings, those did not really happen until the LSD work. And as I say in the book, I don't even record for the readers the early spiritual awakenings, because they were so introductory compared to what emerged down the road that they hardly seemed to be significant. But at the time, they were very significant to me. But why I did it, why I pushed as hard as I did, partly because
and not just the two things. One, why you pushed as hard as you did. Well, I kind of get that, because I'm a bit like that. But the foresight to record it all, to do it in such an organized way, to do it like a program. That seems very impressive to me and very interesting, very conscious.
Well, I was trained as a philosopher. I was trained as a philosopher of religion. And I did this first because I wanted to leave a trail of breadcrumbs so that if I needed to, I could find my way back. But then that quickly passed. And I did it because I read Stan's Realms of the Human Unconscious, which was published in 76. I read it in 78. And Stan had already integrated decades of experience and hundreds of people's experiences in this book. And I saw that it was a huge landscape. So I saw that it wasn't simply about having some early experiences, but I wanted to explore the landscape. And I had enough, my background in religious studies, I had a sense of the history of mysticism and the scale of it. I thought, okay, here is a methodology that would allow me to explore these dimensions. Got to keep good records. And it's not just keeping good records. Part of the depth of our attempt to integrate what we experience sets the stage for the universe's next communication with us. So that the clarity of retention sets the foundation for the next stage of encounter. So
that's such a deep observation, Chris. I really like that. That's
so
deep.
Really consolidating and understanding and crystallizing it. I found in my experiences that the universe always met me exactly where I stopped. Right. Not necessarily in a tight linear way, but in an overlapping way. It met me where I stopped, and it was always taking me systematically deeper and deeper. If I had not recorded as carefully, if I had not really thought about and digested my experiences, I think it would have kept me, it wouldn't have engaged me as deeply, but it recognized that I was serious about this. And sometimes it was like, are you sure you want this? Are you sure? Because now, 15 years into it, I knew that there was a cost for all these things. Are you sure? Because once you go here, there's no going back. And it's like, I was sure. Give it to me. And it would give. And then I would try to hold on to it as much as I could. Now, I think I went farther and deeper than was maybe wise for me. And I really am trying to be honest about that in the book. I wouldn't do it the same way if I had it, because now I know what I didn't know at the beginning. Now I know that it's an open-ended journey. You can't get to the end of the road. We talk about getting home and going home, and that's true. There is homecoming, but there are layers and layers of homecoming. Now I would be more patient. I would be gentler with myself. I would invite as much of the divine intelligence into my life as I could possibly hold, and I would be more patient with the gradual nature of my own developmental process. So I pushed deeper than I should have. But holding on to it is an important part to the clarity that can emerge. And I trust the clarity that emerges. I trust that there is a clarity of transmission coming in which transcended my cultural conditioning and transcended the conditioning of my soul. That there are certain things which, as I've come to understand my deep story, certain things that were given to me which no incarnation in my soul lineage had experienced anywhere. So there was a sense in which I was doing this not just for me, but for my entire soul. But most importantly, I wasn't doing this for me. I was doing this for all my brothers and sisters. I was doing this for humanity, because every experience that I had is not simply my private experience, but now the human species has it. The human unconscious, the collective psyche has it. And I believe it lives in our collective awareness.
Well, I'm very glad you did, Chris, and I completely get that from your account, and even more so from meeting you. And it's genuinely a gift, and that we get to explore ourselves and each other together. Together,
a great gift together, Tim.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being willing to have this crazy conversation with me. It's been a real delight to explore. And
for me too.
It's lovely to be connected.
Yeah. More in the future. Yes.
I hope so. That would be lovely.
I get to England periodically.
Great.
And, so I hope we'll be able to sit down over tea or coffee someday.
That would be lovely. I live in Glastonbury. Have you been there?
I haven't.
It's nuts.
Okay.
So I look forward to showing it to you one day.
Good. Me too.
All right. God bless you.
Love.
I love
Yeah.
it.